oops, everybody today on this call. I am so humbled and thankful for this opportunity to connect with new stars who've arrived and who are looking for breaking their the next move, or trying to understand how the Canadian workplace is. What are the tips and tricks which work? What are the wins and what are the learnings in this scenario? So thank you for this opportunity for listening. And the next 30-35 minutes, I'm going to take you on a journey in understanding, some of the best practices and experiences. A lot of job seekers, a lot of recruiters, a lot of, my colleagues and hiring managers have shared. And I thought this is very, very crucial and imperative in today's time when we are doing everything virtually. um there's a sign of opening up, but it's going to be a gradual opening. But who knows, virtual interviews might be some of the norm, which a lot of companies might conduct in the future. In any such case, the world is going virtual, and I feel the tips I will be sharing today might be beneficial to a lot of people here. So, without further ado, I'm going to begin my slides, um, which is titled very aptly How to Rock Your Next Virtual Interview. And the reason why I titled this How to Rock, that's because any interview is a situation where you already have a lot of aspirations, a lot of nervousness sometimes. But given the fact that you're not meeting somebody in a one-to-one or face-to-face situation, you're now in a virtual world. Do you, like, things change, right? We are in traditionally we've never kind of adapted to this way. So a lot of you might have given interviews until now virtually, some of you might not. So these tips, I think, will both benefit both the audiences. So going to the next slide. So as I was mentioning, that there is a new realm of virtual interviews. Now, with the adoption of social distancing in many countries amid the coronavirus pandemic, more companies have moved to virtual interviews as a safe and efficient alternative to screening candidates and filling roles. It's no longer like, you just cannot, typically in old, like I would say maybe a 24 months back or 12 months back, we would have a typical HR phone interview, and then you would be called for a first round in an office setting. But now, a lot of companies have kind of cutting that. In fact, I do have a last year data, which there's a career services platform. They recently found out that 89% of employers are now adopting virtual interviews. Now, this data is very, in the middle of pandemic data. However, the 89 percentage is a very, very high number. So that means 9 out of 10 interviews are conducted virtually. And of course, like 2020 was a time when like a lot of closures were there, a lot of restrictions were there. But even moving forward, there is a high possibility that this method will be using in the at least in the initial rounds, like the first and the second interview. And nearly 75% of executives, surveyed by Corn Ferry, which is a very premier recruitment company, uses real-time video to interview leading candidates, while 50% leverage it to narrow down their applicants. This is very important because if you are getting a call for an virtual interview, it takes like 30 minutes for the recruiter or the hiring manager to talk to you or to understand who you are. And it's so efficient. Like, they don't have to, set up a time, a boardroom, a meeting room, and then meet with you. You don't have to travel, drive, or, take a transport to go to the location and then plan your whole day. Like, here it is right there in front of your computer, you are talking. So this is the new realm. This is the new reality of virtual interviews. And what I've heard in the industry irrespective of which sector you are. This will be a very, very, adoptable and adaptable method in the future. So going forward to the next slide. So, I mean, now I understand that number one, getting the HR email, hey, we really like your profile and we want to talk to you, gives you a lot of excitement. It gives you that hope and aspirations, gives you that, you know, that future prospect and possibility. At the same time, for some people, it might be, oh my God, now what do I do? I'm anxious, I'm nervous, I want to give my best because I want that job. And because, I applied for that because I felt that I can, perform the job responsibilities very good. But, when you are in a situation, when you are in a virtual interview now, these are some of the tips which you see on the screen, which will really help you stand out. And it's about mindset. Like, I understand you're in front of the computer and you're not, like, physically shaking hands with your future employer. You're not sitting on that in that conference room, or that boardroom, and you're not or that meeting room, whatever you are, wherever you are. But at the same time, treat yourself, the computer, as that, space. So first of all, treat and have that mindset. So I would say, sit down, and you have to be prepared when you sit down that you are in that environment. Imagine, like, we all have had, physical interviews in the past. Like, we've sat in those rooms, we've given, answers, we've, ducked questions, we've asked questions. Imagine you're in that situation. It's just that you're in front of the computer. It shouldn't be any different, because at the end of the day, the job is going to be, the same job which you would have been doing, had you not been interviewing virtually. So the first thing I would say, some of the do's would be, it's perfectly acceptable to use notes and take notes as part of the process. Do you remember when we go to do a physical interview, we usually take a pen and paper, like it's one of the best practices to kind of carry a diary or a notepad or a good, pen in an interview. And then we would write questions, like, as we talk. And if you are that kind of a person, please continue doing so even when you're doing a virtual interview. I would just say one thing, that just let the interviewer know that you will be taking notes or you will be writing, so that they know that, what you're doing, and they are not alarmed by suddenly seeing you writing. So please make sure that if you do have that, attitude or way of interviewing where you take notes, please do so. Just inform the recruiter or the hiring manager that I am going to do that. I would say pen and paper works best, because when you're doing on a computer, you don't want to, you don't want to have that typing sound coming. It depends on your typing speed too, but any sound, I think, is very distracting. So you don't want to type on your computer, the same computer you are giving interview. At the same time, you cannot have two laptops open, one for taking notes, because I don't think it kind of, looks professional and good enough. So just have a pen and paper handy and write, and just inform the recruiter that, hey, I'm going to talk and write, and I hope that's fine. And I am 100% sure, and no recruiter is going to tell that they have an issue or anything that way. The second most important thing is test your technology or do a dry run. A lot of us, have different technologies. Like, we might have iPhone, iPad, your laptops. We have, like, all sorts of configurations of laptops. So you want to make sure that if you're using a Zoom platform, if you're using a Microsoft Teams or any platform, make sure that the app is downloaded. A lot of times when the recruiter sends you the first email, or the link to, interview or to meet, they do have instructions at the bottom of the email how to download the app or how to do it. So make sure that you kind of have a, technology dry run, because it's very important to make sure that there are no glitches, because you are already, on your high anxiety or high excitedness on the day of your interview, the last thing you would want is a technology sabotage happening. So make sure that you have that all set. Even I would want to add is a Wi-Fi connection. We have households which might have 4 or 5 people using the same Wi-Fi. So if it's possible, make sure that you're closer to your Wi-Fi router or whatever, so that you have uninterrupted, internet connection. So I've been in a situation where I was interviewing somebody and suddenly her, Wi-Fi went off and, it was blank or she froze. So, I mean, it is okay, it's acceptable. However, just make sure that you can mitigate some of those things in advance. Just make sure if you have a LAN cable, that's one of the best things, to kind of have that in uninterrupted, because the interview would maximum last for 32 minutes to 1 hour. And I'm sure you can make arrangements in your household that nobody disturbs you at that time, or you're closer to a router. So the third important thing is set the scene and minimize distractions. You don't want to sit in front of the computer while in the background you have some pictures, maybe personal pictures, or any quote, unquote, or like you have a personal life for sure, but make sure either you blur your background or you have a plain wall or like any backdrop which minimizes distractions. You don't want to have a like a big family vacation pictures or something. Like, I mean, if you choose to do so, great, but I would rather recommend you to have a very minimized distraction based backdrop in when you're talking, and keep everything ready, your charger, your set your phone on silent. You don't want in an interview the phone buzzing, so set it to silent, keep it away if you wish. Keep your note, your pen, paper, a glass of water, and be ready, for that interview. And that's how you kind of, sit down prepared. A lot of times people ask is, how do you practice or do you memorize? Because trust me, people understand when you memorize and when it's natural, because at the end, like, we have the recruiters are doing this day in and day out, and they can see the natural flow versus a very memorized script. So be natural. Make that eye contact. A lot of times people feel, should I look at the camera of the laptop or should I look at the person? So I would say in this technology, ask a friend, ask your spouse, ask anybody to do a call with you, like a mock call on the device you would be using. So you can, or and if they can record it, so you can then see how you look talking. So where is your eye? Is your eye at the camera, or is your eye at the at the screen? So it kind of changes there, right? So you have to make sure that you are really practicing, and you're really monitoring your body language. Body language is huge. Like, you want to you want to see somebody relaxed, you want to see somebody confident, you don't want somebody fidgeting, you don't want somebody tapping their fingers, you don't want somebody to kind of moving their mouth. And so you have to have that body language. Sit in a comfortable couch, table, wherever you want to take the interview, and make sure that you're really comfortable with that place. And because again, it will all show. If you were in a physical situation, it's different, but in a virtual world, I think it kind of changes a lot. um, excuse me. So that's how it is important to understand your body language. And I really encourage anybody to have a recording with your friends. I'm sure a lot of us have Instagrams and all of those fancy apps. So you can ask anybody to record you with that mindset and on that technological app like Zoom or whatever. And you can always have a rehearsal and a practice. And I would say last part would be dress the part. Like, again, you would want to dress up the same way you would be dressing up in an interview. I always say dressing up is good than being underdressed. So even if it's a like if it's a technology company and people will be wearing maybe t-shirts in their interview, I would really recommend you to wear something which shows very professional and serious attire. Even if they say it's smart casuals, it's never wrong to dress up. Like you don't want to walk in and feel like you're not dressed for the part. It also is a non-verbal cue to show how serious you are for the interview. So please dress the part, and make sure that a lot of we've seen some really hilarious and funny videos where you're dressed up really good on your top half of the body, and your down is you're wearing something else, or your pajamas. But make sure that you're not visible down. I just want to say that. Or hey, why not wear the whole attire properly and sit? It's a matter of 30 minutes, and it's a matter of getting that job. It's a matter of that job is going to lead a new life. Were some of the do's were some of the do's to understand what you should be doing. So I think you must have got a fair idea of what are the do's. So if we go to the next slide, some of the don'ts. So, although interviewing from home, may feel little less formal, please, a lot of candidates don't treat it with the same level of preparation or seriousness as in-person interviews. And that's what I said in my previous slides, that treat it as, you will be in a normal scenario, because what is happening is the outcomes of this interview is the same outcome which you would have anticipated, be a virtual interview or not. So it's very important that you have that same level of prep, same seriousness level, when you are doing this in person. Very important, don't be late. You don't, it's always a good idea to log in a minute early than a minute. Like you don't want somebody waiting. Like imagine when you drive or you take a transport to the interviewing on-site location, wouldn't you arrive there 15 or 10 minutes early? You would, right? So if you draw the same parallel in the interview world, it's always a good idea to arrive a minute or two early. So even if you have to wait in the lobby while somebody admits you, I think that's perfectly fine. So you need to have that understanding of, I would say mapping both these scenarios. So don't be late. Don't use creative backgrounds. Like I understand everybody's creative, everybody wants to show uniqueness, but you really want to have a very neutral or a, I would say subtle and professional background. So if you are like when I say background, like I said, it might be your wall behind you, or it can be if you're using a background on your virtual screen, like just not to show your house or where you're sitting, you might have you can blur, or you can just put a white background instead of like you're sitting on a vacation, there's a beach. That's all good, great, but I feel we should have a very neutral background. You don't want to spike any a lot of people have different preferences, a lot of people have different ideas and thoughts and how may they perceive you. You don't want to give anybody a chance to see or speak or interpret something which you don't intend to, right? Very important, don't use a silly username. So if you have a username, would like to keep it professional, like Sunover Sayed example, or Sonia Siddiqui, just keep it that. Or I mean, you wouldn't want a very creative or a silly username, which might again not be deemed professional. Very important, don't fiddle with the camera. Like once you've adjusted and once you've had some, practice or trial runs, you know where the camera is. Even at the beginning of the conversation, just keep a camera at one place, like your laptop screen, and don't keep it moving like up and down and here and there, because when you move, like it gets distraction, right? And that distraction, like you're like running for, like for example, running for a charger. Like you don't want to run in the middle of a meeting for a charger. Like you should be, that shows you're not organized, that shows you're not prepped enough. So those are very small things, but can have paramount interpretations. And the last thing, if you, like, a lot of people feel that, okay, now it's the computer interview, so I can open the document and I can read, or I can do, I would strongly recommend to avoid that, because if you are reading, it shows your eyeballs, your eye movement can, and I said recruiting managers are very sharp, they're smart people, they've done this day in and day out, so they can see that you're using a computer for reading and for reference. And I don't think it shows very, very good and professionally. So, if you want to memorize, you want to practice, do it before, not in that 1 hour. So those are some of the don'ts, and we move to the next slide. So these are some of the common mistakes, and this is very useful because once you've understood the do's and the don'ts, still a lot of times, people do these some mistakes, and one of them is, I said, inadequate preparation. Like I said, a lot of people think it's a home setup or it's not an office setup. So a lot of people do not prep that much. But I feel it shows when you are not prepped enough for an interview. And when I say prepped enough, it means, you should be reading, you should be learning, and you should be practicing your elevator pitch, your introduction, because that everybody's going to ask you introduction, why you want to apply to this job, what is your strength and what is your weakness, and or maybe a couple of behavioral questions, like why do you want this job, a situation wherein this happened, how did you do. Those are some very, very common questions which are asked. Make sure you prep that. And when you prep, make sure you prep according to the job description. Like you don't want to say that I'm a very, very aggressive, person if you're applying for a daycare job for babies. Like you want to say that, okay, I'm a very natural person. I love, I have a lot of patience. So you can't say that I'm, aggressive or something that way, which was totally contrasting to the job you're applying. So make sure that you have those points correct. Again, a lot of times in virtual interviews, we also have pre-recorded interviews, because now what happens is you have some, it's to eliminate even the human touch in the first screening round. So you have a 5 questions, they ask you those questions, and they ask, it's like, it's all pre-recorded, like you get 2 minutes to think, and then you record your answer, and then you submit. So that's something, again, you will have to plan, and make sure that you think in advance for the job description of the company and your personal traits and capabilities and how best you can answer. And the lastly, as I said, like don't worry about your eye contact, because make sure that you practice earlier, that you have to see the screen, the person, or the camera, because all of those three things will be, will have a different eye angle. So make sure you practice. And again, as I said, please silence your phone. You don't want to get alerts during the interview. You don't want to hear any beep or ping or anything. So make sure that these are common housekeeping, but shows a lot about the, prep, shows a lot about how much you're invested in that interview. So with that, we go to the next slide. So these are I just have 2 key takeaways here, because I don't want to bombard you with a lot of key takeaways, but I want to tell you something. Close out the interview strong. Make that 1 line or 2 lines, or whatever you're comfortable with. Make those 3 lines, which is like your closing line. For sure, you want to thank them for this opportunity and the time. Always thank them. Always have that close, interview, because if you, it's like, you have a great meal, but if your dessert falls flat, you kind of remember the dessert, right? Because it's your last, and it's human nature to have that recall, which is your last, step. So make sure that you have a very close, very strong interview closeout. And always, one of the ways of having that is having questions. And when I say questions, it's relevant question about the company and the job and the hiring manager. You don't want to ask a question which is like, like your company is X, what is, what do you feel you will be, doing of because of this scenario happening. I would say I would want to hear that from a candidate, more so asking from a company. So make sure you ask really tight and smart questions. I would rather ask a tight and a smart question or not ask, because you don't want to ask a question which shows, it's just a question you're asking just to for the sake of asking. So make sure that it really shows that thought, that process, and that it really is going to leave that lasting impression. Because again, as I said, it will be a recall, for the interviewer, because it's the last, you have to make sure that they feel good about you. So that's my key takeaway. That's my LinkedIn profile. If you wish to connect with me and you follow me, and if you want to engage on some of the thoughts which I regularly post on my LinkedIn, I would be very welcome. So please go ahead and, connect with me. And yep, next, Sonia. Yep. So that's it. I will be very happy to hear any questions, any thoughts, or any queries anybody has.
Great. So thank you so much. The questions are all here. Can we share certifications or documents without even being asked for during an interview?
It depends what kind of an interview, but typically in a virtual interview, like it depends on which round. Like in Canada, like whatever I have seen, they've never asked you your certificates or your documents in an interview. They might ask you maybe before selecting you, and which is actually very less, but typically it's asked when you get an offer for the reference and the verification. That's when, but I don't see any chance to be showing your certificates in an interview. They called you for the interview because they have seen those certification titles. They trust you. They don't want to verify there. Right, Sonia? I mean, what is your experience? I haven't seen anybody showing their certificates in an interview.
No, so if that's required, it's usually after, they've made the decision to hire you, they will ask for your certifications or degrees or whatever it is that, you need to bring in, and they'll see that on your resume that you've already mentioned that, and employers are assuming that you're telling the truth. So, if you've noted that on your resume, that means you have it. Next question here is, could you suggest a good way of asking questions? Like, what are the next steps after the interview? Like, when can I hear back from you? Like, how do you ask those questions? And yeah,
Sure.
okay.
Like I definitely feel you should be asking, like as an interviewer, you should be asking, because you will be asking, so typically you should ask like a couple of questions depending on the length of the interview. Like the first question could be more thought provoking, more showing how much of a research you've done about the company. So it would be like a technical or something related to the job. And for sure, you should be asking, and I will be interested to hear about the next steps. What is the typical process, and how do you kind of, how much time does that take? So it's always a good idea to ask in the interview itself, and you will get an answer. I'm 100% confident you will get an answer about the process. They would say that, oh, we're in the initial stages, or we're in the final stages, or we are evaluating, and we will then like when you ask how much time does it take, they would typically give like a week or two or something. And I would say if they've said a week and you've not heard, until a week, then you can follow up. But then asking that question really helps you also. But it's a very good idea to ask that question.
Thank you. And during an online interview, does body language matter? And like, what are you supposed to do with your hands? Or, like how do you show yourself on camera?
Sure, body language matters. And I think I covered that in my do's. Like, make sure that your body language is very pleasant. It's not fidgeting. You're not moving a lot. It's very important. You can you you have to show that confidence. Like, I'm not a body language expert, but I've heard, like, fidgeting, or putting your hair behind your ears for ladies, and scratching with a pen in your hand. You don't want to do that because it shows nervousness. So make sure, like, what would you do? Like, I would always tell you this: what would you do if you were in a face to face? What would you do? Would you scratch your head? Would you put your, would you fidget with your hair? No, right? Why would you not apply the same rule here? Don't think this is different. I hope that helps.
I would say the same thing. Treat it as like an in-person interview. That's it. That's like, there's no difference there at all. There's a question about salary range when they ask you about expected salary. How would you say if you have no idea how the salary ranges work in Canada?
First of all, you should have an idea of salary range,
Yeah.
and the best way is, there's so many websites like, Glassdoor, Payscale, etc., where you put in your, the company or the role, you do get a typical range. That's number one resource. Like, you should have a idea of that job, what salary, and it's all available in the open. Number one. Number two, I would suggest you to even, cross check in your network or in your reference. Like, look around. Typical, so you don't have to give a number, you have to give a range. So make sure that your range is, respectable and aligned with the market. Like, if you're applying for an analyst position, you would be in that range. You cannot ask a, manager range, vice versa. And also, when you give a range, it shows your research, right? So it shows that you are not far off from the market realities. So there are lots of resources available. I would really suggest you to research before you go. Next question, please.
Thank you. And how do internal promotion interviews differ from first time, like entering the company interviews?
Oh, they are paramountly different because, and I think this forum right now, we are talking about the first time or the new Canadian interviews. That is a separate topic. And it's very different because, and I don't want, I know I'm very cognizant of the time. But, just to give you a snapshot, the internal promotion interview is something when you've been there, you've performed, you have achieved those KPIs and even actually overperformed the expectations. So you have to demonstrate that, versus a new interview when they don't know you. You're the first time, you're telling them, you're showing them, you're assuring them that you can do the job. And versus the former, when you've performed that job. So it's a very chalk and cheese situation. And I think it would not be justice to kind of give a complete answer here. But I hope, these 2 or 3 lines give you a perspective of, it's very different and how you can take it forward. Next question.
Thank you. And is it okay if we ask about like why they didn't select them after an interview? Is it okay to reach out to companies and ask them?
If you get a rejection email, for sure ask. Like, I'm not sure of how many times you will get responded, but I'm a strong propagator of, but you shouldn't be asking, like, I would say reword it well. Don't ask, why did you reject me? I would reword it like, can you give me some scope of improvements, or do you have some feedback from the hiring manager, as how I could have performed better. Just word it better. Don't ask, why did you reject me? That is very, that doesn't show a very good communication style. Word it nicely with the same message, But for sure, I think you should ask, and you can write like your feedback I will be, using for my improvement and my, personal development. So, I think it's always good. At sometimes it also shows that you've demonstrated that proactiveness. So it's always good to ask.
Thank you. And this is a good question. Could you give an example of a crisp question about the job that you can ask at the end of the interview to kind of leave a lasting impression?
Yes, and there are so many smart questions, but it depends on, I would really craft that question based on two things: the sector and your job description. Like if you're going for an analyst job versus a manager job versus a vice president job, so the questions would be so different, because you want to, that question should show a, your research, b, your investment in that company's prospects, and third, also reflect on your smartness. So one of the crisp questions could be, if like, it depends, it's not a cookie cutter question, but I've heard this a lot. And questions like, how is the team, or how do you see the role impacting the vision of the company, or I know that the company is going to launch a product X. How do you see this team member or this team fulfilling that vision of the company? So it shows that that they are launching X, that these are some of the skills, and the answer which you get from the person, the hiring manager, you can easily say that, oh wow, I've done this, I've demonstrated this, so this is a very plug and play skill which is needed, I assume, for this role. So you can tweak and take it back and reinforce that point that you have done, it. So it should be a very, I would say, crafted question. And it will depend on, as I said, so many factors. But what I mean, questions around team, vision, impact really stands out. Hope that helps.
Thank you. I'm just trying to get to the next question here. What do you do about the no Canadian experience question? First of all, they wouldn't ask you if you have Canadian experience or not, but they might frame it in a different way. And how would people deal with that, not having Canadian experience?
So I have actually, Sonia, if you remember, we did a webinar on what is Canadian experience. Do you remember? So that was a very exclusive webinar only on this topic, wherein I spoke about what is Canadian experience and what do you do and how do you answer questions. But in pursuit of time, I can just say Canadian experience is very different for each individual. Anybody would have a separate personalized interpretation. But I would say when they talk about Canadian experience, they're talking about some skills and some soft skills which they feel a person should know in order to perform their job better. So I would say you should be, assuring the employer that you have that understanding of plug and play, strengths or skills. Say, for example, communication. Communication is so important in a Canadian workplace. So and that might be sometimes counted as Canadian experience. So how do you communicate in a heated situation? How do you communicate in a agreement or disagreement? So all of those behaviors are which forms like communication, which forms the Canadian experience. So there are so many other ways of answering, but I would say if you are asked anytime about you've not worked in Canada or you don't have experience, I would, just put those 3 or 4 skills. I know I haven't worked in Canada, but I understand that working in Canada requires A, B, C, like communication, positive attitude, and open to criticism and feedback, and whatever 3 or 4 points. And again, the points should be picked up directly and or resonate with your job description. So these are some of the points, and I have demonstrated this in my career of 10 years, 5 years, 12 years, whatever it is, by, in my this job. So you will have those examples in your resume. So you can point that again there. So it's about telling them that I've had those skills, I've had those experiences, and I'm ready to learn to, if I have to tweak and adopt in the new workplace. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. I'll take this last question here. What is a common question that will be asked during an interview? Like, just can you give an example of a commonly asked question and how to answer it?
Sure. Like, I think common interview question would be, tell me about yourself. So that's a question which will be so like you would hear that no matter which sector, which role or company you give. I think you will be asked that question, and I would say there's no common answer, but your answer should stand out. It should have a different flavor than what is all, like, don't repeat your resume when you're introducing yourself. Make a paragraph, write 3 or 4 lines, which is reflective of, you have to be authentic of who you are, and look at the skills required for the job and then craft it. There's no cookie cutter answer there. Like, and don't read your resume, please. It will show. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Is an internal referral much more important to get an interview?
Internal referral definitely helps. It definitely helps, at least, now, like, typically a job application would get like 300 or 200, applications. So if you have an internal referral, that's a ticket to put your CV in directly in front of the hiring manager or the HR, whoever is the lead there, in with respect to those 200 or 300 applications. So for sure, if you have an internal referral, it will make an impact, at least to get those eyes on your resume. Now, if selection or not is a different story, but I think what we all want is that chance, right? We all want somebody to see our resume, and internal reference is definitely one of the ways to kind of do that. I hope that answers.
All right, thank you so much. We will wrap things up here. Sanover, would you like to say anything before I move forward?
Yes, I want to thank again for this opportunity, for all the heavy turnout today in this webinar. I feel very humbled and I feel very happy to be sharing some of the nuggets which I've gathered in my career. And will be very glad, as I said, to touch base with you and connect and be engaged on LinkedIn. So please feel free to hit there. And I want to wish you all the best and a great summer ahead.